Dr. McMacken, and welcome to the Real Truth About Weight Loss Summit. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Oh, me too. So, as the director of Bellevue's Hospital Adult Weight Management Program, what interested you in this field?
I got interested in this field mostly because I really like talking to patients and communicating with people about how they can change their lifestyle. And honestly, I got into this back in 2005. I was right out of my residency training, and I really just enjoyed the connection with my patients on a one to one level. And that led to a few years of talking to patients about things like very traditional approaches to weight loss, like portion control and counting calories, and things that at the time I thought were the right thing to talk about to help people lose weight in the short term and keep it off. And then as I matured in this field and learned more, I started to develop other approaches. And I learned about sort of what the science shows about the most effective ways to lose weight and keep it off and promote long term health, which, of course, as a doctor, is my number one thing that I'm looking for. So I started changing my approach, and that really, for me, engendered this incredible personal reward as a physician, and it made my patients happier too. So I'd love to talk more about that as we move on.
Please do, because I love hearing what your clinical experience has been with this.
Yeah, so at the hospital where I work, I take care of a very diverse patient population, people from all over the world. So I'm often either speaking Spanish myself or using an interpreter phone for Polish, French, Bengali, Russian, West African dialects. The list goes on. And so I have this incredibly rich cultural experience about talking about food and lifestyle with people. And the key thing that I've noticed is that the message has to be individualized. So every person who comes into my office is different. And even though my overall message is always going to be about eating foods in their less processed form and focusing primarily on plants, how to actually help people change the way they eat is a very different story, especially when you factor in cultural traditions, socioeconomic issues, families, and so forth, as you well know.
Mhm. Well, you mentioned socioeconomic issues. People seem to think that eating plants is expensive.
Yeah, I hear that a lot, and it's interesting because, as I said, my patient population is not only culturally diverse, but I do have a fair number of patients who are actually living at the poverty line or below. And what I have found is that some of the healthiest foods on the planet actually are the least expensive. So foods like legumes, beans, lentils, chickpeas, some of the whole grains, especially oats or even brown rice, or the root vegetables, sweet potatoes. Some of these foods that are among the most health promoting actually happen to be the least expensive. Now, that does not, I don't want to discount the fact that there are certainly access issues for a lot of people where they may not have access to fresh fruits and vegetables or even some of these healthy foods. And so that's where I work with people to figure out how they can get more access. But I think if depending on where you're shopping, if you're buying a lot of gourmet, sort of plant-based alternative foods, that can really drive up the price. And those are great and delicious. But the foundation of the diet being in the simplest healthy foods is really where it's at.
You have a 99 cents only store where you live?
We have a few, yeah.
Because I found that I did an experiment, and I found that at least here in Los Angeles, I could eat pretty darn healthfully for about $3 a day at these
Wow.
stores, because they had a lot of produce that, like
Yeah.
bags of oranges and bags of potatoes for 99 cents, frozen vegetables. True, not everything was organic, but like you said, beans and
Yeah.
rice. I mean, when you cook them
Yeah.
yourself, they're practically free.
It's true. It's true. And as a side note, the great thing about my recommending those foods is that my patients have been told over and over and over that those foods are not good for them.
Because they're
And
carbs, right?
because
Carbs are banned.
they have carbohydrates. And so my patients are so excited when I tell them, like, people's faces light up when you tell them, no, if you like Rice and beans. That's fantastic. That's actually something you should be eating more of. But yeah, we in New York City, where I am, we actually have these green market carts. So they're fruit and vegetable vendors who are out on the street most of the year, not in the worst parts of winter, but and they have very, very inexpensive fruits and vegetables. And I also do recommend the frozen vegetables for people if they're unable to find fresh, especially during the winter months.
Absolutely. And sometimes frozen can be as nutritious as fresh because they've
Or
been
more.
yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely. So where do
Exactly.
you think this came from, this notion that so many people think that carbs are bad and that they cause weight gain and that they turn to sugar and that we should be on a low carb or paleo or keto diet? Where I'm sure you hear that a lot.
Oh, I never hear that. No, I'm just kidding. I hear it about once an hour.
Uh-huh.
And it is really interesting. I hear it from patients, I hear it from friends, I hear it from family, I hear it from other doctors, I hear it from medical students. It is just an unbelievably prevalent notion in our society right now. And I think part of the issue is that the term carbohydrates is actually just not accurate. So obviously, carbohydrate refers to a type of macronutrient, along with protein or fat being the three big macronutrients. But it's not really correct to refer to foods as carbohydrates. We have foods that are rich in carbohydrates, but they're not. Every food, for the most part, contains some protein, some fat, and some carbohydrate. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is that when I hear people talk about carbs, you know what they're referring to. They're referring to muffins, bagels, white bread, candies, and on and on and on. And foods that we all know, everybody knows are not necessarily health promoting foods. And they tend to lump those in with other carbohydrate rich foods that are health promoting. So it's very confusing when people use the term carbs. It's really like lumping, as Dr. David Katz always says, lumping lentils with lollipops. Carbohydrate is a term. Talking about carbs is a term that just doesn't. It just promotes more confusion. So I actually, when I do a lot of lecturing and speaking on nutrition to physicians. And when I talk to medical students and residents and practicing doctors, I tell them never use the term carbs when you're talking to patients, and don't even use the term fat or protein if you can help it. Just talk about foods, because that's what makes it really clear.
Yeah. Oh, that's brilliant. So what are the risks of these low carb, paleo, and keto diets that are so popular right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they are these are diets that appear on the surface very attractive to people, because people do lose weight initially on these diets, and they're obviously, like any fad, they're popular. People post things on social media, it keeps gaining attention. But it's important to know a few things about low carb or keto diets. The first is that we really don't have a lot of science on these diets. It might feel like we do because they're so popular, but I think that the enthusiasm for these diets is really far outpacing the amount of evidence that we have. So, to put it in perspective, we have a lot of science on other eating patterns like Mediterranean or vegetarian slash plant based. We have lots of science for many decades. We have observational studies, we have interventional randomized studies, we have metabolic ward studies. With ketogenic diets, we have some of that evidence, but we don't have it in as much volume, and we don't have it long term. So when you adopt a ketogenic diet, you're really taking a risk, because we don't know even the medium term and certainly not the long term side effects of eating this way. So that's the first thing, is that you're kind of going off on a little bit on the diving board there. The other thing I would say is, what we do know about the short term side effects of these diets, we can look to actually the pediatric literature, because as many people know, the ketogenic diet was originally developed for children who had refractory epilepsy. So kids that have seizures for whom drug treatment was not working. And in that setting, ketogenic diets have been shown to be effective in some studies. And that's a very narrow indication. But when you look at the pediatric literature as far as side effects of these diets, the list is incredibly long. So we're talking about everything from kidney stones to bone loss to vitamin and mineral deficiencies, constipation, pancreatitis, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, anemia. We have electrolyte problems and therefore cardiac problems from these diets. And we also have problems with cholesterol. In fact, recently, about a month ago, a study was published looking at young, healthy volunteers who were asked to follow a ketogenic diet for about 3 weeks. And what they found in the young, healthy volunteers following a ketogenic diet is that their unhealthy form of cholesterol, their LDL cholesterol, went up 44%
Wow.
in just 3 weeks. And the interesting thing to me about this study was it wasn't just that the LDL cholesterol went up, it was that the genes changed. The way our gene expression functions to regulate cholesterol, that also changed in a negative direction. So we have a lot of reason to be concerned about these diets. And when you look at the data on low carb diets overall, so ketogenic is obviously a form of a very, very low carb diet, but low carb diets in general, we have a huge amount of research on what happens to people long term when they follow low carb diets in general. And probably one of the biggest studies of all, published in 2010, showed that it's about 130,000 people, showed that people's risk of dying of anything, all cause mortality, went up about 23% for people
Incredible.
on a low carb diet. Their risk of cancer went up 28%. The risk of heart disease went up about 14%. So I can't really get behind a diet that might help people lose some weight in the short term, but has extreme potential long term consequences.
And yet they're so popular, and all you see is the people that are losing weight on them, promoting them for weight loss, and nobody's talking about what you just did, all the deleterious side effects of these diets, which you don't get on a plant-based diet. Everything
Yeah.
you mentioned that was a problem with the low carb diet actually improves on a plant-based diet. Why is that?
That's right. And I mean, the other big piece to point out is that the science on 1 or 2 year studies on ketogenic diets do not actually show that much weight loss. I think the biggest meta-analysis showed 1 kilogram difference in weight loss between people following a ketogenic diet and control diets. So,
Wow.
so this is a short-term phenomenon. So when you see your friends adopting a keto diet and they lose weight at the beginning, that is because they are eating fewer calories. It's as simple as that. And when you eliminate an entire macronutrient category from your diet, you're going to be eating fewer calories. The way people lose weight at the end of the day is having a negative calorie balance. And so when you eat fewer calories, you're going to lose weight. Also, people lose a lot of water weight, at least at the beginning when they go on a keto diet, because they lose their glycogen or carbohydrate stores, and that carries water with it. But at 1 year, the science shows that people aren't that different. And it might be because people can't stay on a ketogenic diet that long, or it might just be because it balances out. No one's really clear on that yet.
Wow. Well, on a whole food plant-based diet, you can actually eat more food and still create a calorie deficit. Can you talk a little bit about why it's so effective, not just for health, but for weight loss as well?
Absolutely. So the really cool thing about a plant-based diet that's based in whole foods is that, just as you said, the studies and the science actually show that people in general don't have to worry as much about portion control, and they don't have to count calories to lose weight. Now, again, I always individualize this message. There are some people for whom it actually works to continue to track calories or to look at portions. And there are some people for whom that does not work. But the real science shows that when people are not asked to count calories or measure portions, they can still lose weight if they're focusing on nutrient dense, less calorie dense foods, which are basically the whole plant foods. And as you pointed out, ends up being a large volume of food. And for many people, that's very freeing to be able to say, you know what, I'm going to fill my plate with foods that are healthy, that are rich in nutrients, that make me feel good. And I'm not going to worry about how big my plate is. I'm going to worry about how nutrient dense my food is, how it tastes, and how I feel when I eat it. And I think that's very freeing. And the science really supports that.
So is there scientific evidence that a plant-based diet is effective for weight loss?
Absolutely. So we have data from observational studies, which are basically studies looking at groups of people over time, that show that people who eat plants, plant eaters, vegetarians and vegans, happen to have across the board in every study consistently healthier body weights than omnivores. So we know that already. And then when you look at studies where people are asked to follow a plant based diet, they start out on an omnivorous diet, they're asked to follow a plant based diet, Meta-analyses show that they actually tend to lose more weight on these plant-based diets than they do on control or omnivorous diets. So we have very strong science that this works. We actually have science showing that this is acceptable to people. That people always say, my doctor colleagues always say, oh yeah, I know a plant-based diet will work, but nobody will ever do it. Well, I beg to differ. I have lots of patients that love it, and the science shows that this is very acceptable to a lot of people. A lot of people really like being able to not have to worry about measuring portions in the same way, and just pick healthier foods. It and then they lose weight without necessarily consciously having to track calories.
Right. That's terrific. And what are the effects on things like disease reversal for things like heart disease or diabetes compared to like following a low carb, high protein diet that's often recommended by physicians for weight
Yeah.
loss?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So we have extremely strong evidence for plant-based diets in across the board in several areas. The first and probably foremost is with heart disease. So across the board, people following plant-based diets tend to have a reduction in the risk of heart disease dramatically. And we've seen in the work of numerous physicians, including Dr. Ornish and Dr. Esselstyn, that even for people who already have heart disease, that can be reversed with a whole food plant-based diet. And so for me, there's there is no low carb strategy, there is no keto strategy that has ever been successful at doing that. So if that were your only if that were your only reason for adopting a plant-based diet, that'd be a great reason, since heart disease is the number one killer. Um, Number two is cancer risk. So we know statistically vegans and vegetarians, so plant eaters, have lower rates of cancer. And that's probably for a lot of different reasons. One is that a healthier body weight does translate into a lower risk of cancer. And we know plant based eaters tend to have healthier body weights. Number two, when you're flooding your body with micronutrients, nutrients from plants, with fiber, especially fiber from whole grains, this is a strategy that works through gut microbiome, it works through your genes, it works through stress at the cellular level, antioxidants. All of this works together to lower your risk of cancer. So that's very potent as well. And I think my personal favorite is actually diabetes. So I cannot get enough of treating my patients who have type 2 diabetes. Asking them to try a plant based diet is the single most effective thing that I've seen. It is, I honestly, it's unbelievable when people start shifting especially their protein sources away from animal foods and more into plant foods, so more beans, more whole grains. The benefits in terms of glucose in people with diabetes are astounding. And then when people have pre-diabetes and they're at risk of getting diabetes, switching to a plant-based diet has also been shown to be extremely effective. So I think that the interesting thing about high protein diets, particularly, so there was a study that was published, I think, in 2016, where they took two groups of women, both groups were overweight, and they had both groups lose 10% of their body weight. And one of them did it through a high protein diet, and the other group did it through a regular level of protein diet. What they found after the 10% weight loss is that women who worked so hard to lose 10% of their body weight through a high protein diet, they still did not have any benefit in terms of inflammation or insulin resistance. So they had just as much metabolic disarray despite losing 10% of their body weight as they did when they started.
That's
So
incredible.
yeah, it's really incredible. So I this is why I think a plant-based diet is the most powerful thing you can do as far as leveraging your diet, not just for weight loss, but for overall health.
Yeah. It's pretty common now for people to be overweight or obese. More of our population is than isn't. And I wonder how you feel about this health at every size movement. And of course, we never want to shame or blame people for being overweight, but can we articulate that there are still risks being, even, 20, 30 pounds overweight to maybe motivate people to want to do this, not for looks, but for health, that why it's important, even if we look like everybody around us, that it is still important to have some weight loss if you are overweight, even if you're not currently experiencing a problem like diabetes or cancer or heart disease.
It's interesting with there's a term, a medical term called metabolically healthy obese, and that's a scenario where if you check sensitive markers of blood sugar, blood pressure, uh, fatty liver, and all that, there's less of we can find fewer problems, and so metabolically you don't really find as much of an issue. But I think that what we do know that is clear is that as body weight goes up into the higher, much higher ranges, into the more what we traditionally consider unhealthy ranges, there is a higher risk of cancer, there is a higher risk of sleep apnea, there is a higher risk of some of the other long-term health consequences. Now, I think it's I think it's very, very important, as you pointed out, to approach every situation with compassion. And I want to get to the fact that losing weight is extremely complex. And I'd love to sit here and say it's just as simple as going on a plant based diet. And then you're going to lose all the weight that you want and get to whatever body weight you want to weigh. But I think um, one of the things that I have an incredible humility about is that patients respond to changes in lifestyle differently. And two people might be eating the same amount of calories, or what they think is the same amount of calories, and one person will lose more weight than the other. There is so much we don't understand, and that we're still learning about the biological control of body weight. And I tend to look at it as it's no one individual's fault. We live in an environment of uh, foods that are plentiful, calorie dense, honestly, almost addictive for a lot of people, hyper palatable. They're engineered to make us keep eating more. They're in bigger sizes. They're everywhere. It's hard to avoid. And so it's really an issue. It's a societal issue. It's no one individual's fault, which is not to say that people can't individually make changes with support and help and guidance. But I have a lot of compassion around celebrating people where they're at. But yes, I think you're right. We also do have to acknowledge that there's still health risks, even if your blood sugar appears normal or your blood pressure appears normal.
Right. Well, what are some of the biological and environmental factors that affect people's ability to lose weight?
So I think that some of the things that we've learned in the past 10 to 20 years or so about the mechanisms that regulate body weight is that there is a very, very strong genetic component, and we don't fully understand what all the neurotransmitters are, but we do know that people respond differently to differences in calorie intake. So, for example, we also know that there's this concept called metabolic adaptation. So, if you gain a lot of weight over your life and then lose weight, the amount of calories that you need to stay at that new lower body weight is much less than someone else who weighs the same, who's always weighed that same weight for a long time.
Wow.
So yeah, so it is very, very, it's almost harder to stay at, to maintain the weight loss than it is to lose weight in the first place for a lot of people. So
That
yes,
that that was going to be one of my questions. Why is it so much harder to maintain weight loss? And now what you're saying is because you need a lot less calories than somebody else that weight that has never been overweight. That's mind blowing.
exactly right. It's exactly right. And so, again, I have a lot of compassion for people who have lost some weight and are maintaining that body weight. There are definitely behavioral strategies that people can go to try to maintain that weight loss. And I'm sure you have seen, and I have seen lots of people be successful at that. So it's definitely possible. But I don't want to make it sound like it's easy for everyone. So we don't fully understand why that is, but we do know that the body metabolically tends to adapt and wants to drag you back to your previous weight once you've weighed more.
That
So
that really sucks actually.
I know, I know. This gets to why as a society we have to work towards prevention. But again, I have patients who have lost weight, and we all know people who have adopted a whole food plant based diet who have lost a lot of weight and have successfully kept it off for a very long time. So it is absolutely possible. And part of it is that the big studies that we have on people maintaining weight loss have not always used whole food plant based diets. They're expecting people to be able to eat small portions and count calories and weigh themselves every day and do all these things that are honestly pretty tedious, can be psychologically harmful for people, and may not be able to be maintainable behavior changes for the long term. So I'm hopeful about the idea of eating a diet that's less calorie dense, that's rich in fiber, that's filled with micronutrients, and having once you get into the routine of eating that way, you don't have to do some of the other more tedious activities of, like we keep talking about. And
Right.
so that, we've seen it work anecdotally. I'd love to see a large database of people following a whole food plant-based diet and how they maintain their weight loss long term, because I do think it is possible.
Gosh, I would love for you to do that study, and I'd be the first one to sign up because I am a success story of somebody that was obese that using the whole food plant-based diet without weighing or measuring myself or my food or counting calories, carbs, or points. I can eat large volumes of food, delicious food to satiation every day. So I feel
Yeah.
very lucky. But what you're explaining makes sense why it's so hard for so many people to do it. If people vary genetically in how many calories they can eat and lose or maintain weight, especially after a weight loss. Do people also vary genetically in how much fat they can eat and be lean or fat? Because I know that some people seem to do well on a larger percentage of fat and are able to maybe lose or maintain weight. And other people I've met, especially overweight women, it's like Jack Sprat can eat no fat. So, and that's why I get concerned when we have these, when we're painting everyone with the same brush and saying everybody must eat, this amount of fat a day. And I'm like, I haven't seen that to be possible in everyone.
Right. I agree it's not possible in everyone. I think, again, when I look at the published research, there was actually a very interesting study that came out earlier this year called the Diet Fits trial, and they looked at they took people and divided them to two groups. One group was asked to follow a lower fat diet, which was not low fat by the definition you or I might use, but lower than the average American diet. And then the other group was asked to follow a lower carb diet, which was not a ketogenic diet, but in the lower carb range. And both groups were asked to but primarily focus on eating whole foods. Whatever strategy they were assigned to, they were just asked to eat more whole foods, less processed foods, and not to count calories or measure portions. And everyone at the end of the study lost weight, and everyone lost the same amount of weight. They also looked at genetic markers. So there's there is some thinking that some people may be more sensitive to carbohydrates or to fat in terms of insulin resistance or other metabolic changes. And what they found in the study is it didn't matter. As long as people were eating more whole foods, they tended to lose weight. Now, again, I think that might explain physiologically what's going on, but we all know there are some people who, for whatever reason, when you eat a certain type of food, it triggers you to want to eat more of that food. And there are people who exist on that spectrum of susceptibility at different places. So someone who exists way off on one end of the spectrum where they're very susceptible, if you eat, say whatever that trigger food is for you, that's gonna derail you and it's gonna set you off. And there are other people who can eat that food and have it once and then move on. And so you have to know where you sit on that spectrum. And for every single person, what I tell people is we have to figure out what's going to work for you. And it may not be the same as the person next to you. I don't like to say everybody should eat, low fat or low carb or this or that. But I do know that the common denominator is people need to eat more whole foods, less processed foods, and their diet should be founded in plants. That should be the absolute foundation of their diet.
Right. That's great. Well, have you noticed that your female patients might say to you that they have more trouble losing weight than, say, their husbands, even though they're following the same diet? It doesn't seem fair, but maybe you could explain why women seem to have a harder time losing weight.
I can validate that that is something I've seen, and I think it's pretty frustrating for women who want to lose weight to see their friends or their partner to change their diet and make small changes and lose a lot of weight, and women seem to have more of a struggle, particularly around perimenopause or past menopause. We don't fully understand it. I will be honest. At least I don't fully understand it. I don't think the science is really clear on what happens, but we do know that hormonal changes that happen around menopause tend to make women store fat in different places, like around the belly fat and so forth, where men tend to store it in the first place. And it's not something that's that well understood. But I can validate that it is an issue. I think that again, this to me, one of the strategies I've seen really work with people who are trying to lose weight and who are getting frustrated around it, especially women, is not to focus on the number on the scale.
Mm.
A lot of times in my weight management program, I will tell someone up front, when you come back in 2 weeks or in 1 month to see me, I don't really care what that number on the scale says. And in fact, if you don't want to be weighed, we don't even have to weigh you. What I
Wow.
want you to track, what I want you to track is your behavior changes. And what we're going to sit down and do today is come up with a set of very specific, very granular goals that you're going to work on that work for you in your life with your situation that you're in right now. And we're going to track whether you're able to meet those goals. And if you can't, we'll set some new goals and figure out why. But we're not going to track the number on the scale because you're not in control of that. You're more in control of the changes that you make, not the number on the scale. And so I want to take the burden and the shame and the frustration out as much as I can because it's a really hard process.
Oh my God, that is incredible. I mean, I would love to have you as my doctor. If I was willing to go to New York, could somebody actually be in your program? Because you sound amazing, incredible.
Thank
A
you.
doctor that doesn't weigh you or doesn't insist, because I mean, I never understood why certain doctors you go to that you're not even there for weight loss. Like, you're at the dermatologist, like, why are you weighing me? What does that matter? Right?
Yeah, I think we have to be sensitive to individuals, and I do think we don't want to go off the on the other end. I mean, doctors. There are plenty of doctors who never talk about issues of weight with their patients, and I've never, it's very rare for me to come across a patient who is very overweight and doesn't know it. Okay, I'm not gonna say, hey, did you know you're having an issue with your weight? I mean, you have to be sensitive about it, but for some people, checking the weight once a week is a great idea. For other people, it's a horrible idea. And we just have to figure out who you are. And you may already know who you are in that process. But yes, you can come see me anytime.
Oh my God. That's so funny that you said that, because I remember what my impetus was to finally lose weight and keep it off when I had, right before I turned 50, I broke my knee and I was 50 pounds heavier than I am now. And I was too fat to use the crutches or the walker. So I had to be in a wheelchair for 3 months, and I had to have my husband, help me with my, you know what I'm saying, going to the bathroom. And that was really embarrassing. And that's when I decided that I'm going to do something about it. And I'll never forget, the orthopedic doctor said to me, have you ever thought about losing weight?
Oh, come
And I
on.
wanted, and I looked at him, and, I wanted to punch him, and I said, no, that never crossed my mind, so I know what you're saying. It's
That's like what not to say 101.
that is so funny. So what about thyroid? It seems like so many people now are being diagnosed with hypothyroidism,
Yeah.
Hashimoto's. It seems to be really common. Is there anything you can speak to about why that is so prevalent and how that might affect somebody's ability to be healthy or lose weight?
Well, I do think that there's a growing prevalence of autoimmune conditions in general, and of course, the most common cause of hypothyroidism is an autoimmune condition called Hashimoto's. But autoimmune disease, whether it's inflammatory bowel disease, lupus, all of the autoimmune and multiple sclerosis, these are all on the rise, and nobody really understands why. But it's pretty clear that it probably has something to do with our gut microbiome and our microbiome in general. So the gut bacteria that live the bacteria that live in our intestines, and obviously we know that's very closely shaped by what we eat. And that's another reason that I recommend a plant-based diet, no matter what a person is, whether you're healthy or whether you're living with chronic disease and wanting to get healthier, is because it helps optimize, we think, the type of gut bacteria that you have so that they can protect you against autoimmunity and other issues. So when it comes to thyroid, I think what I hear pretty commonly that my patients, they want to get their thyroid checked because they're thinking my metabolism is so slow and it must be my thyroid. But the reality is that there's so many other things that govern metabolism. Yes, if you have an underactive thyroid, you're probably going to gain some weight, but you would be surprised. It's not the major factor in terms of people gaining a lot of weight or losing a lot of weight. It's a minor factor. And so if you have an underactive thyroid, we're going to want to correct that. And that might help a little bit, but it is really not going to make that big of a contribution.
Wow. So a lot of people say that because they're menopausal or perimenopausal, that they just cannot lose weight.
Well, that there's probably more truth to that. Not that they cannot lose weight at all, but that it does become a little bit harder.
More difficult, right? So yeah, so just be a guy if you can, because it seems a lot easier. So, how important are things like sleep and exercise, especially lack of? So many people just don't exercise, and so many people have poor sleep. Can this affect our ability to be healthy and lose weight?
Yeah, those are great questions. I will say that I did not fully appreciate the role of sleep in terms of maintenance or of body weight and prevention of weight gain and loss of weight. I did not appreciate this until recently, but there are incredible studies showing that when people are sleep deprived, they actually tend to have a really hard time losing fat from their bodies. And it decreases the amount of fat you lose even when you're eating a lower calorie diet, and it actually promotes you losing more muscle mass, so exactly the opposite of what you'd want. And so sleep plays a huge role, and one of the things that I think is um, it just really highlights the fact that it's not just about food, it's about so many things other than food, and how they all interact. So I definitely, when I have patients who are really struggling to lose weight, and usually at the beginning of our conversation, one of my first questions is around how are you sleeping, and trying to improve the sleep environment for people so that they can optimize their chances of being able to lose weight. Exercise is interesting because if I had to pick one myth that I hear people coming to my office saying all the time is, the reason I can't lose weight is because I don't exercise. And exercise is fantastic for so many reasons, but it has not really been shown to be the thing that makes people lose weight. It tends to be very important once you've started to lose weight. It tends to be really important for preventing weight regain. Sort of that phenomenon that we talked about before, where you need fewer calories to stay at the same body weight. Exercise does help at that point. And I mean, I don't think this has been well studied, but I think probably most of us would agree that when you're exercising, it tends to, for some people, it tends to make you feel like more motivated to actually take care of the rest of you too. Some people have that effect. So you're working out regularly, it tends to make you want to eat healthier foods. Other people might actually unconsciously overeat when they exercise. So exercise is great, but I wouldn't count on it to be the single thing that helps people lose weight. If you want to lose weight, you at some point you're going to have to change what you eat.
Hmm. Absolutely. Great. Do you have any success stories from any of your patients that you could share with us that,
Yeah,
that would maybe inspire the people watching this summit that
sure.
me too?
Yeah, sure. So, one of my favorite scenarios is a patient who I met, it's probably about 3 or 4 years ago now, who came to us weighing, he was in the 300s. So was very overweight. At that time, he actually was homeless, did not have a place to live, and was relying on shelter food to for his sustenance. And he also had a heart failure condition, so he had problems with his heart function. And I remember meeting him and thinking, I'm not sure, how I'm going to be able to help this person. He has so many odds stacked against him, but I'm going to see what I can do. And so we worked together for a period of about 2 years. And a few months into our process of talking together, he actually got a housing. He got an apartment. And once he got an apartment, he was actually able to start doing some cooking on his own. And we gradually got him to move towards a 100% plant based diet. And this is someone who had never heard the term plant based. He'd never, he probably had barely heard the term vegan. He was completely naive to all of this. But he's someone who really took the reins and went with it, and just started cooking in his apartment and actually started exercising more. And over the course of about 2 years, he lost about 70 pounds, and his heart failure actually improved, his blood pressure improved, he came off some of his medications, and he was able to maintain a lot of that weight loss for an extended period of time. And this is someone this is not someone who came in saying, I'm going to shop at this fancy grocery store and go on diet pills, do all these. This person was completely naive, had some of the fewest resources I'd seen in many of my patients, and yet managed to go on a fully plant-based diet, lose a lot of weight, and reverse some of his conditions. So I have a number of other stories like that, and it's It is the most rewarding thing to see people get healthier. I know that sounds trite, but it's why I keep doing what I'm doing.
It must be so inspiring to go to work every day knowing you're affecting change in such a positive way in so many people's lives.
Yeah, it is. Thank
Yeah,
you.
that is so cool. So, we talked a little bit earlier about the low carb diets not being favorable for health and only being favorable for weight loss in the short term. But how do you get people over that hump psychologically? Because it's been drummed into their head that I know we're not supposed to use the word carbs, but these are their words, that carbs are bad. And that it's so hard to get people to eat things like potatoes, especially, or rice. How do you
Yeah.
get over that psychological hump with people? Because I find that they're just so afraid to try because they think that they're going to gain weight. Because if they've been on a low carb diet, initially they might gain a couple of pounds of water, but not fat. But so how do you get over that carbophobia in our society?
Yeah, I think sharing with people success stories that are out there, and there's so many out there now where people can read about people who are following a whole food plant-based diet and seeing what their approach is, demystifying it for people. I think that people, you're right, that it really feels like an uphill battle when someone comes to you with this incredible fear around eating carbohydrate rich foods. And so I usually test the water by having them just read more and get exposed to it, watch documentaries, just start the process of building awareness, especially if someone's very, very concerned about gaining weight, where I don't want them to, I don't want this to backfire. I want them to gain the information, get inspired, and then when they're ready to try it, I want to guide them so that they do it in a way that's most likely to help them achieve their goals. So if they're saying, okay, I'm ready to try eating, I'm ready to try eating potatoes or brown rice, even though I'm so afraid. I want to make sure they do it in a way that's going to support their goals. So if they're gonna go out and get fried rice and takeout or French fries or whatever, carbs that are prepared, carbohydrate rich foods prepared in an unhealthy way, then it's all going to backfire, as you and I know. So I really want to support them in making the transition healthfully, and and that's what I've actually seen work. There are people who it's very hard for them to switch, and they really need to be in almost an immersion environment. Those work great too, where you just go all out for 3 weeks or however much time you have, and people can really see changes in those in immersive or kickstart environments too,
Yeah.
rather than the gradual approach. But that's not for everyone or possible for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you work with people individually or do you put them in groups? And if so, how important do you think support is for someone on this journey?
Support is probably the most critical thing. It is the most critical thing, and not just support from your medical team if you have a medical team that's working with you on it, but probably more importantly, support from your friends and family and having some kind of community around this. So I work with people individually, but I refer them to whether it's, I have them bring a family member in, whoever's important to them in their life. I invite them to come to all of their appointments if they're comfortable with that, so that we're unified around the plan together and we can openly talk about what the concerns are and how they can change. I encourage people to join online kickstarts, social media groups. We know, you and I both know, as much as plant based is growing, there's excitement around it, it still feels like you're swimming upstream in a lot of circles. So you need that support. And it's really important to be around people who normalize it, who celebrate what you're doing, who can share recipes and ideas. So fortunately, this is one of the great things about social media, is that if you surround yourself there, you have an instant community, even if you live in a place where there's not a lot of people around you. That said, there are plant based community support groups all over the United States. And so looking around, I think if you get creative, you can probably find one in most places. So, but to answer your question, support is probably the most important predictor of long-term success.
Wow, I would agree with that. So, what about the environment, though, Dr. McMacken? Because sometimes people want to do this, they want to get healthy, but they're living with other people that still want to eat a lot of meat and oil and processed food, and they have to have these foods in their house and maybe even prepare them. So, how critical is the environment for someone affecting permanent dietary and lifestyle change?
And the environment is critical, because I think that one of the things we know very clearly is that if you rely just on willpower, that extinguishes by 1 p.m. I mean, we're it's like you can last half the day with or a third of the day with willpower, and then the rest is going to be what's around you. So you really, really need to change your food environment for this to work. And that's again why I have people bring in their family members to help support. And if you can't get support from the people around you, you have to get really creative in how you change the food environment in your house. I've had people say, they're for whatever reason, their kids or their significant other does not want to get the snack foods, the unhealthy snack foods out of the house. And I say, well, you know what? Maybe let's find a locked cabinet, put it somewhere else. I mean, you got to do what you got to do. But
Right.
listen, I and you and probably everybody else we're no different from each other. We are biologically destined to eat these unhealthy foods if they're in front of us and we're used to eating them. So you have two choices. You can either clench your fists and try really hard not to eat them, which is probably not going to work, or you can get them out of your environment or find a creative way to not see them in your environment if that's your last resort. But
Right.
you have
Great. Thank you. I appreciate you saying that. What would you say to somebody who's given up hope that they would ever be able to lose weight?
I that's really tough, and I don't blame people for getting frustrated, and I don't blame people for feeling hopeless about it, but I do think that it actually probably starts with acceptance, and not I don't mean acceptance of I'm going to always be unhealthy or something like that. I think it starts with acceptance that you are you are capable of making choices that are healthier for you, and you are going to love yourself and forgive yourself if it's hard because it is. I don't know any other way to say it. And so it has to start with, and again, I know this sounds so trite, but it has to start with compassion towards oneself. um, and whether we are struggling with our body weight or struggling with other habits that we don't, things that we don't like about ourselves, if you fight yourself all the time, it's actually going to make it harder to change. So I guess that's really the first thing, to be a little bit touchy feely about it, is really starting from a place of acceptance and not anger with oneself. And then I guess the second thing, again, it would get to just focusing on really, really, um, really minute goals. Pick something really small that you know you can do and you can achieve, and then build on that. I use that strategy all the time. Does it mean, if you get rid of, say, get that candy bowl off the desk in your office, is that going to be the thing that makes you lose 50 pounds? No. But is it going to be the thing that in 2 weeks you can look back and say, wow, I did that and I survived and I feel good about it? Then pick the next thing and keep building on it. If you're the kind of person who weighing yourself and tracking your weight is going to make you feel worse about things, then don't do it. Focus on the behavior changes, like I said before. I think there is a lot of room for hope. There are in fact, I can say I've never seen a person who could not lose some weight. But not everybody lands in the same place for the reasons that we talked about. There's a lot of variability, but I've never seen anybody who could not lose any weight through making lifestyle changes.
Right. I find that women have, I don't know if it's the magazines or television, because I work with a lot of women who are beautiful, but they have different body shapes. Maybe they're short, for example, and they just don't look like a string bean, and they beat up on themselves when they're perfect the way they are. And that's, to me, the hardest thing, is to say, listen, you didn't make Dr. So-and-so's, weight
Yeah,
chart, but you're perfect the way you are. That's to be the
yeah.
hardest part, to
I
get
could not
people.
agree more. There's a great film that came out. Did you see that film, Embrace? It's a
No, it sounds great.
That's documentary about women and their bodies, and I thought it was very positive. It's a really great film.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So, Dr. McMacken, what is the real truth about weight loss?
AJ, I think the real truth about weight loss is that even though it's not a straightforward process, it's a very complicated process for a lot of people, that it is possible to lose weight. It is possible to get healthier. It's possible to do it in a way that promotes your health long term, medium term, short term, and also promotes just general planetary health. And that's through a diet that's based and rich in plant foods that are less processed. It's actually conceptually very simple. It's hard for people to make the behavior changes, but get the support that you need, learn about it, go on to all the different websites that we know of that support this way of eating, learn a little bit more and give it a try, because I've seen it work for lots of people.
Wow, beautifully said. It's been such a pleasure talking to you, Dr. McMacken. Thank you so much for being here.
Likewise, thank you.